just to give you a quick highlights. Matt Russell, has been part of this planning team. He's got an amazing set of credentials that you can read about, but I just want to say that I have never seen anyone work harder or smarter on putting something like this together. And that's on top of all that he's doing with the agricultural sector on climate change. So give Matt a big round of applause. You'll note that in Chris Anderson's bio, not only has he been the state climatologist, but he has done a lot of work getting plans put together for communities across the state. I know this not just because it's in his bio, but because he was generous enough that when I was doing some of that work, he gave me all kinds of fantastic information, and we were able to have a real impact on communities, thanks to the work of Chris Anderson. Please give him a round of applause. As for former legislator and Iowa Policy Project founder or co-founder David Osterberg, if we did believe in carving mountains, and we had some, he would be on our conservation Mount Rushmore. There's really not much he hasn't done, and some of the best policy that we have in the state of Iowa, he is directly or indirectly responsible for. Please welcome David Osterberg. Cindy Lane is one of those Renaissance women. She can draw landscape architecture, she can write a legal opinion, she can do grants, and she does all kinds of stuff behind the scenes for water, for climate, and for just being a great citizen in our community. So she's going to have a lot to talk with us about. Cindy Lane. And Nikira has not only the background that you described here, but when we talk about civil disobedience, she was out at Standing Rock and has quite a few stories of substance to tell. Did I get that right? Okay. Please welcome Nikira, who's really put her work. So we're going to go in the order of Matt, Cindy, Chris, David, and Nikira with their remarks. Like before, we still have 3x5 cards on the table, and I believe we can do a little bit more distribution of those. So if you need some 3x5 cards, just raise your hand at some point during the thing. We'll try and get some cards over to you. So we'll be taking those questions, and we'll also bring Jim back up here in a little while to help answer some of the questions that you have for the panel as well. We will not be taking the microphone around because we only have 2, and we already have 6 of us up here. So there'll be no more shouting out much, so plan on writing legibly, and we'll try and get your questions. And with that, I'd like to turn the opening remarks for this over to Matt Russell.
Thank you, Pat. And I've been at Iowa Interfaith Power and Light since April, and I'm going to start today with a couple of stories and then make some points. But before I do that, since Pat called me out, I'm 48 years old, and I'm at that point in my life when I was back in the seminary and we did pastoral care and counseling. That's been like 30 years ago almost, 25 years ago. And I didn't become a priest, but I was there for a long time, almost. But the whole idea of like how you move through your life and you're like at different stages in your life. So I'm 48 years old, I've been running this organization or leading it since April. And the lesson that God's given me is that the only way to be in charge, Matt, is to not be in charge. And so this didn't happen because I led it by controlling everything. This happened because God used Iowa Interfaith Power and Light and the resources we have to create an opportunity for other people to step up. Plymouth Church and other congregations and the Interfaith Green Coalition of here in Des Moines and the Green Team in Indianola, and Amy, and people stepping up. And so this has been an incredible gift for me to be able to lead an organization in a new way. Because, you know, before I was 48, it was like the only way to be in charge is like you got to be in charge, right? And micromanage and all of that. And we can't do that at Iowa Interfaith Power and Light. So part of it was God putting in front of me a situation that it wasn't an option because we didn't have the resources. But because of that challenge, the opportunity is now a full room of people engaging with us. So I just want to thank everybody that's worked on this and the opportunity to use the limited resources we do have to do something kind of amazing. So 2 stories. The first week that I was at IPL and the last week I was at the Drake Agricultural Law Center was the first week of April. So I started on the 1st and ended on the 5th at Drake, and vacation time, whatever. My last day at Drake, I left the campus, I came home, my husband and I farm about 40 miles southeast of Des Moines in Marion County. And it's an emotional time for me as I'm leaving a job I've been at for 12 years. I get home, I've got to jump on the four-wheeler, I need to check some livestock. So I check the mules and the horses, they're fine. Go to the fat cattle, those are the ones that are being fed to fatten up and butcher someday. They're all okay. And I thought, I really need to check the cows. I can kind of see them, but you gotta check. So I went ahead and pulled around. And I got around the corner, and here is our oldest cow, 4 feet in the air, blown up like a Macy's Day balloon. And I'm standing there, and I'm just like, oh, if I'd have come sooner, and I get off, and I don't even know which one it is yet, and I'm walking over, and as I'm walking, one back leg goes, and I immediately just sprinted to this cow because she was still alive. And I grabbed her front leg, and I started rocking her, and I got her turned. I mean, she helped, but we got her turned, she got up. And for the next 5 minutes, she panted and bellowed, and her body, shrunk down. She lived. And this summer, she had a calf. Or this fall, right? So here's the lesson. I'm standing there just thankful, just in absolute gratitude. And I'm like, what does this moment mean? And I'm connecting it to climate. Our climate, just like that cow, is in a feedback loop that is not going to change. That cow was going to die. Her systems were shutting down. I knew that. I didn't know everything. I'm not a vet. But I knew what was going on. I knew enough of what was going on. I knew enough from what I have experienced in 47 years of being a farmer and working with my dad, and knowing that if I could get her turned over, there was a chance. And there wasn't time to say, well, I don't know enough, or I got to call the vet because I can't do it. I can't even go back to the house and get Pat. I've got this little tiny window. And I saw what needed to be done, and I ran at that cow, and I grabbed that leg, and I got her started tipping, and we got her tipped over. That is where we are with climate. And what everybody in this room, we are all here because we have seen the cow. And a lot of people haven't yet. I did not have probably 5 more minutes. I certainly didn't have 15. She'd have been dead in 15, and in 5 more minutes I might not have got her tipped back over. What I knew in my life, my experiences, opening my eyes, being present in that moment, I saw what needed to be done, and I just ran at that cow and did it. And it was enough. And so as we're thinking here today, and somebody said, well, what can I do? Or, our faith tells us that we have enough. Where we are, we're in this room, we're seeing the cow. It's enough. One other story. How many in here remember the battle about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago? I don't remember when it was, maybe 10. The battle over incandescent light bulbs. Right? The world was going to stop because we were not going to have incandescent light bulbs. It was a political movement. Well, what do we have now? We have LEDs that last 10 times as long. So when you pencil that out, they're cheaper. They use 10% of this energy, and they do about 100 things better than incandescent light bulbs. We're in that moment. Oh, and the reason we have those is because we came together and passed public policy to both put a cost on those incandescent light bulbs and to incentivize first it was the fluorescent, compact fluorescent things that didn't work quite as well, and now we have LEDs. That is what the promise is. Our future is a future of abundance if we let go of the light bulbs and our fear of the change, embrace where we're headed. Trust God with the abundance and see the cow and run at it and do what we can. Couple of things to just end on. Climate change is a threat multiplier. Jim had shared that with us, right? What that means is that climate change is causing all things to get worse. The first half of my life, we were still on the upswing of the green revolution, the fossil fuel, and we were still growing, and people were safer, and women were more empowered, and people were more literate, and people were fed, and there was less conflict in the world. In the last 20 years of my life, that is turning quickly. Climate change is a threat multiplier. But the way to fix it, climate action, is an equity multiplier. What we say we believe as people of faith, that is the only path forward to implement what we believe. And when we do that, we will solve climate change, and we will multiply equity. People will again accelerate more empowered women, more people literate, more people fed, more people not in conflict, not migrating because they're refugees. And we've got a little window to be like all hands on deck to try to make this happen. The last thing, where do we go from here? We're doing some workshops in engagement. There are powerful forces that want to slow down climate action. And last session, not this year but the year before, we gutted our energy efficiency programs in this state. Because climate action is an existential threat to your business, your power. If you depend on seeing the world through scarcity and you want to scare people like the light bulb thing, you want to slow this down. And that's what that bill was about last year, was slowing it down. This year, there's going to be efforts to try to gut net metering. There's going to be efforts to get rid of solar tax credits. There's going to be efforts by the utilities to try to make sure that if you put up solar, you're not going to get the benefit of that. They're going to take away those incentives. Okay? So we're going to be at the legislature. We're partnering with Iowa Environmental Council and Public Policy, Iowa Public Policy, and Iowa Community Action Association, and Environmental Law and Policy. All these groups, and they're out there working together. We're going to be working with the faith community to make sure you know what's going on. You can call your legislator. You can send an email. And March 16th at Emmanuel Methodist Church, we're doing a 2-hour workshop where we're going to write letters. We're going to make Facebook posts. We're going to contact legislators around these very specific state legislative policies that need our action. So with that, I'll pass it on to Cindy.
So, my name is Cindy Lane. I'm the Water Program Director at the Iowa Environmental Council. And I'm going to talk to you today, just try to cover three questions. Why this issue matters, what my organization is doing about it, and why we need you. So to start, why this matters, both why this matters to me and why this should matter to the state of Iowa. So that's my little boy in the corner there, Jude, he's 4. And that's a toxic algae bloom in the corner there in one of our recreational lakes in the state. So I'll get into that in a little bit, but where I'm from Southwest Iowa. My parents are from Decatur County, Iowa, which is traditionally one of the poorest, if not the poorest counties in Iowa. And my mother grew up very poor in one of 7 children in a farming family. And so she worked as a nurse in prison populations, as a public health nurse. And it's very important to my family that you give back to the community in which you live, that you figure out how to use your little tiny skill set and make change. So, sorry. So I being from this tiny little town, my sister is also a social worker, so you can see that her message resonated. But my uncle happened to be a landscape architect here in Des Moines. He worked on projects like Gray's Lake. So for a little girl growing up in Clorinda, Iowa, I thought that that was just amazing, that you could work on projects that would change the way people live their lives, or at least help them live healthier, better lives. So that's how I came to pursue a degree in landscape architecture from Iowa State. I worked here for a few years in the world of architecture and engineering, and then I decided that really I was more interested in the intellectual infrastructures, as I like to say, the laws and policies that dictate how and what things get built. So I went back and did a master's degree in urban and regional planning and a law degree at the University of Iowa. So I've worked in the space of environmental advocacy since coming back to Iowa, and worked at the Iowa Environmental Council as a climate and energy policy specialist, and am now working on water quality issues. And so, again, you can kind of see how my broad interest in figuring out how we make massive landscape change to help people live better, healthier lives ties into water quality. Because in a state like Iowa, we have the majority of our land is in agriculture, about 90%. About 97% of it is privately owned. And we need massive landscape change to deal with massive water quality problems that we have in the state, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So that's where I sit in this world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my organization, the Iowa Environmental Council, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's just a giant umbrella organization of other nonprofits in the state. It's been around, it's a nonprofit that's been around for about 20 years. And we work, as I said, on that intellectual infrastructure realm, in the law and policy world. We work with the Iowa Utilities Board. We work at, with the regulatory agencies, making sure that they're accountable and doing their jobs. We work up at the state legislature, helping to get bills passed that will protect our public health and protect our environment. So we work on education, advocacy, and public policy. So why does climate change matter to Iowa? Well, one, economic reasons, agricultural reasons, public health, natural resource reasons. These things are all, climate change is costing in all of these sectors. So I think it was mentioned before that carbon pollution is the primary cause of climate change. And carbon pollution, the largest cause of carbon pollution, of course, is the power sector. And in Iowa, we have, I think most know, a really robust clean energy sector. One of the largest, second largest, I think, clean energy generation behind Texas, and wind power. So we're doing amazing things, but we have a long way to go. I mean, we're still one of the highest per capita coal-dependent states in the country. We get still the majority of our energy from coal. And we import all of this coal from other states, predominantly Wyoming. This costs our state about $590 million a year. And that averages out to each one of you about $193 a year to get your energy from a source that, one, is outside of our state, and two, is has other public health implications when we could be using a clean energy source. So the agricultural costs of pumping a bunch of carbon into our climate in Iowa are huge, and huge for an ag-based state. One, increased weed growth and management. So weeds are, I saw Bob Riley in the audience earlier, so for any of those who are in the farming world, I always get nervous because I'm sure I'm botching something that's not. So I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think weeds are the largest cause of crop loss, production loss. About $11 billion a year just from weed losses. So carbon pollution decreases the efficacy of things like glyphosate, Roundup. What does that mean for Iowa? Well, it means more chemicals being put onto our land. It means more frequent spraying. It increases the time and the input costs for farmers. So it decreases our water quality as well. Increased insect pressure and crop diseases. Second highest cause of global crop production losses are insects. So many of these insects thrive better when carbon is increased in our environment. Things like corn rootworm and soybean looper that I don't know that much about, but I think are big issues. And increased pesticide use, of course. You can see when there are increased insect pressure, then there's increased use of chemicals. These all have major water quality impacts in our state, and they also cost farmers. Increased weather variability. This was mentioned before, but And also the state climatologist mentioned this, it decreases farmers' work days. The days they can get out into the field, they have to do more, essentially, with less time. And increased weather events cost, only in 4 years alone, about almost $6 billion in crop damage in our state. So that's huge, it's huge. And this increased weather variability is expected to potentially decrease crop yields by 15 to 20%. So you can tell that farmers are already squeezed, and they're getting squeezed even further, and that makes it even more difficult to engage in how we make this massive landscape change that we need to improve water quality. So, increased ozone levels from carbon pollution are supposed to, are predicted to increase by 9 to 19%, and also diminish soybean yields. So again, just huge implications for a state that's an ag-based state. And also noting to Bob Riley, they're also supposed to, carbon pollution is supposed to decrease the availability, the price, and the quality of livestock feed. And it reduces the protein and the nitrogen content of livestock feed, and the ability for grazing. Decreased animal health, growth, and production. Heat stress. When animals are under stress, it alters their metabolic rates, their behaviors, their ability for meat production, egg production. We're the largest producers of hogs and eggs in the country. Big issues for our state. This is getting a real doomsday, isn't it? Yeah. And it also increases, just like insect pressure, livestock diseases, the proliferation of livestock disease. So those are all huge costs to the ag sector, and public health costs, increased respiratory problems, cardiovascular disease, insect-related diseases, and mental health stressors, violence from increased heat, safety risks from flooding. Iowa is the fourth in the nation in terms of number of flooding events that have happened since 1988. So it's cost us about $18 billion in 3 decades from flooding. And when there are floods, you're obviously also exposed to water contaminants. And increased water temperatures also affect our water quality issues in the state. So I think the last one. So I'll talk a little bit more. And this, not only does it impair our water quality that we drink and that we recreate in, but it impacts water quality for wildlife as well. But since the space that I sit in is water quality, I just wanted to touch on that one of the big factors, the major factor that's polluting our water right now in the state is nutrient pollution. Majority of it comes from agricultural sources, nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. And I'll just use one example. So nutrient pollution, when it gets into our recreational lakes in the state, causes what you see, this gross kind of green stuff, algae blooms. And those algae blooms can often release toxins, toxins that are unsafe for pets, for public health. And so this has implications. The state goes out and they determine, if these toxins exist in our state beaches. And then they often close those beaches they do close those beaches if this toxin is found. And so in a state that has, again, very little recreational space, it matters if you're from a poor community like I am, whether or not you can recreate in your lake. And so we're seeing an increase number of algae bloom events. David's done a paper on this issue, an increased number of these events, and an increased number of beach closures over the last decade. And those physical inactivity costs, when you can't recreate in the spaces that you need, not only does it cost our economy, even small recreational lakes put about $2 to $3 million back into their local economies a year. So it matters economically if people aren't using those waters, but it matters to our physical health. So Iowa has now the 4th highest obesity rate in the country. So all of these things are interconnected: the health of our state, the health of our climate, the health of our children. So what's the next? Well, why this matters to Iowa? How we address this issue is clearly, first and foremost, through the power sector. So making sure that we're advancing clean energy and energy efficiency, like Matt just talked about, is really important. And it's one of the ways that the council really works on these issues. We're up at the Utilities Board, making sure that energy efficiency programs that those energy efficiency programs that were slashed last year are restored, that people have the right to install solar, and that net metering, as you talked about before, is not slashed, and that there are appropriate tax incentives for solar and wind. And also, we're working hard to make sure that ag conservation practices, things that can mitigate water pollution that are exacerbated by climate change, are incentivized and required in the state. So.